The dust came in from the west like it always did, rolling across the flats in copper waves that turned the evening sun into something bloodied and ancient. Clara Redmond stood on the porch of her farmhouse with a hammer in one hand and a bent nail between her teeth, watching the horizon swallow the last light. The fence was broken again, the third time this month. The posts had rotted through because she hadn't been able to afford proper cedar, and the cattle she could no longer feed kept leaning against them, searching for greener ground on the other side. She spat the nail into her palm and crouched down beside the porch rail, which was also splitting. Everything was splitting. The house, the land, the sky, even her hands, which had once been soft enough to play piano at the church on Maple Street back in St. Louis, were now cracked and calloused and stained with soil that no amount of scrubbing could lift. She was 34 years old, and she looked 50, and she knew it, and she had stopped caring about it the day they put William in the ground 7 months ago. William had been a big man. Not tall, but wide and solid and built like the oak barrels he used to make in his father's cooperage before they moved west, chasing the promise of land and sky and something better. He had hands that could crush a tin cup or cradle a baby bird with equal ease. He could split a cord of wood before breakfast and still have the energy to chase their daughter, Ellie, around the yard until she screamed with laughter. He was the kind of man the land demanded. And then one afternoon, a horse threw him against a fence post, and his neck broke with a sound Clara heard from the kitchen window, a sound she would hear every night for the rest of her life. Now it was just her and Ellie, who was 6 and still asked when Papa was coming home from his trip. Clara had told her he went on a long journey. She hadn't found the words for anything more permanent. She wasn't sure she ever would. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday. Clara saw him coming from a mile off, which was easy enough on land this flat. He was mounted on a pale horse that moved with a strange, unhurried gait, as though it had been walking for so long that speed had become a forgotten concept. The man himself was enormous. That was the first thing she noticed. He sat in the saddle the way a mountain sits on the earth, immovable and certain. As he drew closer, she could see that he was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of a doorframe. He wore a hat the color of old leather, pulled low over his eyes, and a long coat that was more dust than fabric. She set the hammer down and wiped her hands on her apron. Her rifle was just inside the door. She had learned to keep it there after William died, after the Crawley brothers from the next county had come by twice offering to buy her land for a quarter of its value, their smiles like knife edges. The stranger stopped his horse at the gate, what was left of it, and dismounted with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He removed his hat, and she saw his face for the first time. It was weathered and lined, browned by years of sun, but his eyes were startlingly gentle. They were pale blue, almost gray, like creek water over limestone. He had a jaw that could have been carved from the same stone and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, but somehow even that looked quiet on him. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, like distant thunder that wasn't threatening rain. "I don't mean to trouble you. I've been riding 3 days without much in the way of conversation or supper, and I saw your fence line from the road. Looks like you could use a hand." Clara studied him. She had learned to read men the way other women read books, carefully, looking for what was hidden between the lines. This one stood with his hands visible, his posture open, his eyes steady. He wasn't performing anything. He was just standing there, being exactly what he appeared to be. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for payment." "Then what do you want?" He looked past her at the house, at the sagging porch and the cracked window and the garden that had gone half to weeds. Then he looked at the barn whose door hung from one hinge. Then he looked back at her, and there was something in his expression that wasn't pity, because pity would have made her reach for the rifle. It was recognition. He looked at her the way one survivor looks at another. "A meal," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, like distant thunder that wasn't threatening rain. "If you can spare it. And a place to sleep that isn't dirt. I'll work for it, whatever you need done." Clara thought about this for a long moment. The wind pushed a strand of hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear. "The fence needs mending. The barn door needs rehinging. The well pump sticks, and there's a dead cottonwood behind the house that needs to come down before it falls on the roof." He nodded slowly, as if she had just given him a gift. "I'll start with the fence," he said. His name was Josiah Cain, and he had been a lot of things. He told her some of them over supper that night while Ellie sat on his knee and examined his enormous hands with the fearless curiosity of a child. He had been a ranch hand in Montana, a railroad worker in Wyoming, a soldier in a war he didn't name, a carpenter in a town that no longer existed. He had been married once, a long time ago, to a woman named Ruth who died of fever in a winter that killed half a settlement. He had a son he hadn't seen in 12 years. He said all of this without self-pity, the way a man describes the weather. It happened. It was hard. He kept going. Clara listened and said little. She was not a woman who gave herself easily to trust, but something about the way he held Ellie, carefully, like she was made of something precious, made the muscles in her shoulders unclenched for the first time in months. He slept in the barn that night, and in the morning he was already working when she came out at dawn. He had stripped to his shirt sleeves, and she could see the full measure of him now. Arms like timber beams, a back that moved like machinery under his shirt. He had already pulled up the rotted fence posts and was digging new holes with a speed and efficiency that would have taken William half a day. She brought him coffee, and he took it with a nod of thanks and drank it standing, looking out over the land. "Good soil," he said. "Under all this neglect, there's something worth saving here." She wasn't sure if he was talking about the farm. He stayed that day, and the next, and the next. Each morning she expected to find the barn empty, his horse gone, nothing left but hoofprints. But each morning he was there, working before the sun had fully arisen, methodical and tireless. He rehung the barn door. He fixed the well pump, replacing a valve he fashioned from scrap metal with a precision that bordered on artistry. He felled the dead cottonwood in exactly the direction he said he would, then split it into firewood and stacked it against the house in neat rows. On the fourth day, she found him at the broken fence line on the far side of the property, the section she hadn't even mentioned because she had given up on it entirely. He was setting posts, tamping the earth around them with a heavy iron bar, and when she saw him approaching, he straightened up and pushed his hat back on his head. "You've never met a man my size," he said, and there was a small, quiet smile on his face that held no arrogance. "Let me show you how it's done." He drove the post into the ground with 3 strikes that shook the earth under her feet. Then he strung the wire, pulling it taut with his bare hands, twisting it into place with a pair of pliers that looked like a child's toy in his grip. The fence line that had taken William and 2 hired men a full week to build the first time was rebuilt in a single afternoon. That evening, Clara sat on the porch and watched Josiah teach Ellie how to whittle. He had given her a small piece of soft pine and a pocket knife with a blade no longer than her finger, and he guided her hands with a patience that made Clara's chest ache for the first time in months. Ellie was making a horse, or what she insisted was a horse, though it looked more like a lumpy dog. Josiah told her it was the finest horse he had ever seen. "You're good with her," Clara said. He didn't look up from his own whittling. "Children are easy. They just want to be seen." Clara turned this over her mind. She thought about how many times she had been looked at without being seen. By the townspeople who clucked their tongues and said, "What a shame." By the Crawley brothers who saw only the land. By her own family back east who told her to sell everything and come home, as if home were still a place that existed for her. "How long are you staying?" she asked. He was quiet for a while. The knife moved in his hands, curling pale ribbons of wood into the air. "How long do you need me to?" It was not a romantic question. It was not a proposal or a proposition. It was the simplest, most honest thing anyone had said to her since William died. It was one person asking another person what they needed and meaning it. Clara looked at her daughter, who was holding up her wooden horse with triumph in her eyes. She looked at the fence line, straight and strong against the darkening sky. She looked at her own hands, still cracked, still calloused, but no longer shaking. "Through the winter," she said, "if you're willing. I can't promise more than meals and a roof." "That's more than I've had in a long time," he said. The Crawley brothers came by the following week, 3 of them on horseback, wearing the same sharp smiles. They stopped at the gate and looked at the new fence and the repaired barn and the big man standing in the yard with an axe resting on his shoulder, and their smiles faded like frost in the sun. They exchanged glances with one another, tipped their hats to Clara, and rode away without a word. She never saw them again. Winter came hard that year, the way it always did on the plains, with winds that could strip paint from wood and cold that settled into the bones like a second skeleton. But the house was tight, the firewood was plentiful, and at night Clara could hear Josiah in the barn, singing low to the horses in a voice that carried just enough through the walls to make the darkness feel less absolute. In the spring, he planted the garden. He knew things about soil that Clara had never learned, about rotation and composting and the way certain plants protected others when set side by side. By June, the garden was a green riot of life that bore more food than Clara and Ellie could eat alone. He never asked for anything more than what she offered. He never stood too close or spoke too softly